October 19, 1942, Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal. 3 miles off Henderson Field, Lieutenant Robert Lynch stood on the deck of PT-48 watching a line of Japanese barges moving south in column, each drawing no more than 5 feet of water. His torpedoes required 10. The .50 caliber rounds from his forward mounts struck steel plating and skipped. Navy regulations did not authorize what he was about to consider. The Bureau of Ordnance had already warned against field alterations. 3 miles away, wrecked P-39 Airacobras sat with their 37mm cannons intact. This was the moment before the decision. Lieutenant Robert J. Lynch, United States Navy, age 29, commanded PT-48, a 77-foot Elco boat framed in plywood, powered by 3 Packard engines, and considered expendable in any daylight engagement. PT boats were not capital ships. They were not cruisers or destroyers. They were fast, lightly armored, and expected to strike at night with torpedoes before disappearing into black water. Their official role was harassment, interdiction, disruption. They were not built for prolonged gunnery duels. Lynch was not widely known outside the squadron. He was not Annapolis-class royalty. He had entered service through the reserve pipeline before the war expanded. A technical officer by inclination more than pedigree, he had logged more time in engineering compartments than on ceremonial decks. He knew the Packard engines by sound. He could identify a failing cylinder before a gauge confirmed it. Among destroyer captains, PT officers were tolerated. Among aviators, they were peripheral. Even within the Navy, motor torpedo boats occupied an uncertain space. Fast, improvised, not fully trusted. The Pacific had already exposed that uncertainty. Japanese forces were using shallow draft barges to move troops along the coast of Guadalcanal at night. These vessels drew approximately 5 feet of water. Lynch's Mark 8 torpedoes required a minimum running depth of 10 feet. They passed beneath their targets without contact. Doctrine did not address this problem. Some officers insisted the solution was better timing. Others blamed the crews. A few argued PT boats were being misused. The assumption was operational error, not mechanical limitation. Lynch did not argue publicly. He reviewed torpedo depth settings. He recalculated angles of approach. He ran practice intercepts. The physics did not change. A weapon designed for destroyers would not detonate against a vessel half their draft. His forward armament consisted primarily of twin .50 caliber Browning machine guns, effective against aircraft, effective against exposed personnel, less effective against reinforced barge hulls, carrying troops and light armor plating. Crew reports noted rounds sparked and skipped. In wardroom conversations ashore, the problem was framed as inconvenience, a temporary inefficiency. It was suggested the Japanese would eventually abandon the tactic. They did not. The barges increased in number. Lynch had a habit of walking the deck at first light, measuring spaces with his eyes, gun mounts, cleats, fuel lines. He had studied technical manuals beyond what was required for command. Before the war, he had completed additional coursework in mechanical systems integration while attached to a stateside training command. It had not drawn attention at the time. It did not appear on commendations. It did appear in his notebook. He kept sketches. Weight estimates. Recoil tolerances for weapons not issued to PT boats. No one asked why. Within the squadron, Lynch was regarded as competent but unspectacular. He did not raise his voice. He did not posture. He did not chase headlines and after-action reports. His boat's engine reliability was above average. His fuel consumption slightly below. Small margins, quiet gains. That reputation cut both ways. When torpedoes failed to detonate under shallow targets, some captains responded with aggressive close-in runs, hoping machine gun fire would suffice. Lynch pulled off earlier than most. He did not expose his hull to concentrated rifle and light cannon fire unless necessary. Caution was mistaken for hesitation. One lieutenant from another boat described PT-48 as careful. The word carried weight. In wartime, careful could be interpreted as timid. Lynch did not correct him. Instead, he requested additional ammunition storage calculations for forward deck load distribution. The request was logged. No further action. Henderson Field, 3 miles from their patrol sectors, was littered with damaged aircraft from ongoing engagements. Among them were Bell P-39 Airacobras, single-engine fighters with a distinctive feature: a 37mm Sacher M4 automatic cannon mounted through the nose, firing through the propeller hub. The aircraft themselves were often unrecoverable after hard landings or combat damage. The cannons were not. Officially, they remained Army Air Force's property. Unofficially, they were visible from the road. On October 18, 1942, intelligence confirmed increased Japanese barge traffic moving south under cover of darkness near Cape Esperance. Estimated troop transport capacity, several hundred per run. Naval interception assets were limited. Destroyers were assigned elsewhere. Air cover was inconsistent. PT boats were tasked to engage. That evening, Lynch reviewed his charts again. 5-foot draft targets, 10-foot torpedoes, .50 caliber fire insufficient. He did not discuss alternative weapons in the wardroom. He did not circulate proposals through formal channels. He simply asked one of his machinist mates what the recoil impulse of a 37mm aircraft cannon might do to a reinforced deck beam if properly braced. The machinist answered carefully. The question was not hypothetical. 3 miles away, wrecked Airacobras still sat in the grass, their cannons intact. And on the night of October 19th, the barges would come again. Opportunity had presented itself. So had risk. By mid-October 1942, the pattern was clear. Japanese forces were moving men and materiel along Guadalcanal's northern coastline, using low-profile barges under darkness. They ran close to shore, hugging terrain, often within rifle range of jungle cover. Their draft averaged 5 feet, some less. PT boats were assigned to intercept. They failed more often than they struck. Torpedoes ran beneath their targets without detonation. Depth settings could not be reduced below safe operational limits without risking erratic performance. The Mark 8 was built for ships with mass, destroyers, transports, not shallow coastal craft designed to evade precisely this kind of weapon. Machine guns filled the gap. Twin .50 caliber Brownings spat tracer fire into hull plating and sandbagged positions. Rounds sparked, some penetrated, many did not. Japanese barge crews began reinforcing forward sections with additional plating scavenged from wreckage and scrap. Improvised armor. Enough to blunt sustained machine gun fire at range. The first nights were written off as misalignment and timing errors. After the 5th failed intercept, the reports changed tone. PT boats were not built for standoff artillery exchanges. Their hulls were laminated wood. Their fuel tanks sat vulnerable beneath deck panels. Closing inside 200 yards to ensure penetration exposed them to concentrated return fire. Japanese barges carried light automatic weapons. Some mounted 20mm cannons. Others carried infantry with rifles and machine guns prepared to fire at close range. At night, muzzle flashes stitched across black water in both directions. PT crews reported near misses through hull planking. Splinter injuries, burned insulation. Engine compartments hit by small caliber rounds that could have ignited fuel lines. 2 boats from the squadron returned to Tulagi with visible damage. One lost steering for several minutes under fire. Another suffered a wounded deckhand when a burst penetrated the gun shield. No vessel had yet been lost in these specific engagements. But the margin was narrowing. Command pressure followed. Intercept reports were reviewed at higher levels. Questions were raised about engagement distance, about aggression, about why lightly constructed barges were surviving contact with naval assets. The assumption remained that performance should improve with repetition. It did not. Conventional approaches were tested. Crews attempted to fire torpedoes at oblique angles to increase the likelihood of a shallow detonation. The physics did not comply. The torpedo would still stabilize at its minimum depth before reaching the target. Some captains experimented with coordinated attacks, one boat drawing fire while another maneuvered closer for machine gun bursts at exposed sections. The tactic increased accuracy but also increased exposure. Enemy gunners began focusing on engines, not superstructures. Japanese commanders adapted quickly. Barges began running in tighter formations, overlapping arcs of fire. They varied routes slightly each night. They moved during periods of lower moonlight. Spotters were placed along shorelines to signal approaching patrols. PT boats, designed for speed and surprise, were being drawn into attritional exchanges. Lynch observed without comment. He noted that each failed engagement emboldened the enemy. Barges were arriving with more cargo, more men. Confidence increased when naval interception proved ineffective. Intelligence estimated that hundreds of troops were moving through these coastal corridors weekly. Every successful run altered the balance ashore. On October 17th, a coordinated PT intercept resulted in prolonged exchange. One boat closed inside 100 yards to deliver sustained .50 caliber fire. The barge returned with 20mm bursts. Wood splintered. The PT withdrew with damage to deck supports and superficial injuries to 2 crewmen. The barge continued south. The official summary described the encounter as inconclusive. Privately, officers began acknowledging a structural problem. The weapons assigned were mismatched to the target profile. Torpedoes were too deep. Machine guns too light. Conventional naval solutions, larger ships, heavier guns, were unavailable in that sector at that hour. Destroyers were tasked elsewhere. Air support could not be guaranteed at night. PT boats remained the only asset positioned to intercept. The urgency increased. Henderson Field remained under pressure. Japanese reinforcements moving by barge directly influenced ground engagements. Every unchallenged convoy tightened operational timelines for U.S. forces ashore. Lynch reviewed damage reports from the previous night. He examined the forward deck of PT-48 in daylight. He studied the spacing between mounts, the thickness of reinforced beams beneath the planking, the arc of fire from the bow. He did not request additional torpedoes. He did not recommend more aggressive machine gun tactics. He asked instead for updated weight tolerances for the forward section under dynamic recoil loads. The question did not appear in official after-action summaries. But it marked a shift. The problem was no longer about hitting the target. It was about changing the weapon. And 3 miles away, in the grass beside Henderson Field, sat aircraft that had already surrendered their wings. The next step would not come through official channels. PT-48 departed Tulagi under partial cloud cover, with no accompanying boats assigned to its immediate sector. 2 other PTs operated farther west. For Lynch, the engagement zone that night was effectively isolated. Sea state, moderate chop. Visibility, variable. Moon phase, diminishing crescent. Providing intermittent illumination through broken cloud layers. Shoreline contours visible at intervals. Interior jungle remained black. The forward deck of PT-48 no longer matched its schematic. Mounted ahead of the wheelhouse, secured by reinforced bracing welded into the deck frame, sat a 37mm H-4 aircraft cannon stripped from a wrecked P-39 Airacobra at Henderson Field. The installation was crude but deliberate. Recoil supports had been fabricated from available steel stock. Ammunition was limited and stored in modified containers secured against vibration. No authorization had been issued. No test firing had occurred under combat conditions. The crew had rehearsed loading procedures in daylight, calculating traverse limits by hand. They had estimated recoil arc and deck stress based on available aircraft manuals and engineering approximations. At 23:46 hours, lookouts reported engine noise near shoreline, multiple contacts, low silhouette, Japanese barges. The formation was tighter than previous nights. 4 vessels in column, approximately 100 yards apart, moving south at steady speed. No visible escort craft. Muzzle flashes occasionally visible from forward sections, likely defensive gunners prepared for contact. Standard engagement would have involved torpedo spread, followed by machine gun suppression. Lynch did not order torpedoes readied. He allowed PT-48 to close gradually, engines throttled to minimize wake noise. Range decreased from 1,000 yards to 600. At that distance, .50 caliber fire would have been marginally effective but required sustained exposure. He held fire. At 400 yards, the lead barge altered course slightly toward shore, likely reacting to engine sound. A searchlight beam swept briefly across the water and then withdrew. The margin narrowed. At 280 yards, Lynch gave a single order: stand by. The 37mm gunner confirmed alignment. Elevation adjusted manually. No powered assist. The weapon had been designed for aerial targets, not rolling decks. PT-48's bow rose and fell with the chop. At approximately 250 yards, Lynch authorized fire. The first round discharged with visible recoil. The deck absorbed the impulse without catastrophic shift. The shell struck forward of the barge's midline, penetrating plating and detonating internally. There was no dramatic explosion. There was structural collapse. The forward section of the barge dipped abruptly. Movement ceased within seconds. Return fire from the second vessel intensified immediately. Tracer rounds crossed the bow. One round struck the reinforced bracing near the cannon mount. No penetration. Lynch ordered minor course adjustment, maintaining distance rather than closing. Second 37mm round fired. Impact mid-hull on the trailing barge. Visible fragmentation. Engine noise from that vessel faltered. The remaining 2 barges attempted to maneuver toward shore, accelerating. PT-48 did not pursue aggressively. Lynch selected the third target at approximately 300 yards and fired once. The round struck near cargo section. Secondary fire observed. Machine guns engaged briefly to suppress visible personnel on the final vessel, which began evasive zigzag toward shallow shoreline. Lynch did not chase into shoal water. He broke contact at 0002 hours. Damage assessment at dawn confirmed 3 destroyed barges and 1 heavily damaged vessel beached along shore. PT-48 sustained superficial impact on forward bracing and minor splinter damage. No casualties. The deck reinforcement had held. The cannon had functioned. Ammunition expenditure: 3 primary rounds. Limited machine gun support. The engagement report submitted by Lynch described the weapon as effective against shallow draft armored targets at moderate range. There was no mention of regulatory violation. Within squadron communications, word circulated quietly. The 37mm installation had not compromised speed significantly. Recoil had not shattered deck beams. Accuracy, while dependent on sea state, proved manageable within 200 to 300 yards. Japanese barge movement in that sector paused for 48 hours. The proof was restrained but unmistakable. A weapon designed for aircraft had destroyed vessels torpedoes could not touch. But the enemy would not continue operating under the same assumptions. And neither would higher command. The pause lasted 2 nights. By October 22nd, Japanese barge traffic resumed, but not in the same pattern. Reports from shoreline observers indicated new spacing between vessels. Instead of loose columns, barges began running in staggered intervals, wider lateral separation, overlapping arcs of fire. Some traveled closer to reef lines, reducing approach angles for deeper draft patrol boats. Others operated nearer to shore batteries concealed within tree lines. The destruction of 3 barges had not ended the tactic. It had refined it. PT-48 was no longer an unknown variable. Lynch noticed the first change immediately. The barges opened fire earlier. Previously, defensive gunners waited until PT boats committed inside 300 yards. Now, muzzle flashes erupted at 500. Japanese crews were probing for range, forcing PT boats to reveal their approach sooner. Spotters along shorelines began using signal lamps to mark patrol movements. Once a PT boat was detected, nearby barges altered speed or course before contact. The element of surprise narrowed. More concerning was the armor. Recovered wreckage from the October 19 engagement revealed that some barges had begun reinforcing forward compartments with thicker scrap steel plating. Improvised, uneven, but sufficient to deflect smaller caliber rounds. Intelligence suggested heavier automatic weapons were being mounted on select vessels. The shallow draft problem remained solved only for Lynch's boat, and only if he could close within effective range. That range was now contested. Conventional PT tactics emphasized speed and lateral maneuver. Close fast, fire, withdraw before concentrated retaliation. But the 37mm installation required steadier alignment. Excessive speed reduced accuracy. Rough seas degraded aim. The cannon had power but not rapid traverse. Lynch understood this. The skill required was no longer mechanical installation. It was timing. On October 23, PT-48 engaged a staggered formation under reduced visibility and intermittent rain squalls. Sea state increased. The bow pitched unpredictably. The first 37mm round passed over the target due to deck rise at discharge. The second struck near the waterline but failed to produce immediate structural collapse. Return fire intensified. One 20mm burst struck near the starboard fuel tank. The round did not penetrate fully, but splinters tore through deck planking. A crewman sustained minor injuries from wood fragments. The margin narrowed again. Lynch withdrew before committing further rounds. He conserved ammunition. He declined to pursue into tighter shoal water. The decision drew questions later. Some officers argued that momentum should have been pressed, that the weapon had already proven itself, that retreat ceded initiative. Lynch did not defend the choice. He recalculated risk exposure. By late October, Japanese barge commanders adjusted tactics more aggressively. They began traveling with escort boats equipped with heavier forward guns. They varied departure times, sometimes delaying runs until near dawn, when PT boats risked air exposure. They ran in smaller groups to reduce concentrated loss. The environment itself became adversarial. Rain squalls reduced visibility below 200 yards. Shorelines grew indistinguishable from horizon. Moonlight shifted behind cloud banks without warning. A 37mm cannon required deliberate alignment. The operator had to see the target. Lynch altered approach patterns. Instead of direct pursuit from seaward, he began positioning PT-48 along predicted coastal routes hours in advance, engines idling, silhouette masked by reef shadows. He reduced speed on final approach to improve stability, accepting greater vulnerability in exchange for accuracy. Each decision narrowed survival margins. Slower speed increased exposure to return fire. Stationary positioning risked detection by shoreline observers. Limited ammunition meant each shot had to count. There was no reserve supply chain for aircraft cannons mounted on naval craft. And word had begun traveling upward. Squadron leadership requested detailed installation notes. Bureau officers expressed concern regarding deck stress under sustained recoil. Questions were raised about ammunition storage safety in wooden hulls. Liability language entered correspondence. The weapon was proving effective. It was also unauthorized. Lynch faced a shifting battlefield and a tightening administrative perimeter at the same time. The skill required now was not firing the gun. It was deciding when not to, and the next engagement would remove hesitation entirely. By the end of October 1942, Japanese barge commanders had identified a pattern. One PT boat in particular was responsible for disproportionate losses near Cape Esperance. The destruction profile was distinct. Hulls penetrated forward and midship by high-caliber impacts, inconsistent with machine gun fire. The damage suggested heavier ordnance. The response was deliberate. Barges began traveling in pairs, separated by greater distance. One would move closer to shore, hugging shallow water. The second would run slightly farther out, appearing exposed. The outer vessel reduced speed marginally, creating the impression of vulnerability. It was bait. On the night of October 27th, PT-48 entered its assigned sector at 22:30 hours. Cloud cover was dense. Visibility fluctuated between 100 and 300 yards. Shoreline sounds carried across the water. Engines, occasional metallic clatter. At 23:15 hours, lookouts identified a single barge silhouette approximately 400 yards offshore. No visible escort. Movement steady but slow. The profile matched previous targets. Lynch reduced throttle and altered course to intercept at oblique angle. He noted absence of secondary contacts but did not assume isolation. At 300 yards, the barge opened fire preemptively. Tracer rounds extended farther than previous engagements. Improved range estimation. Lynch ordered slight port adjustment, maintaining distance. The 37mm crew prepared to fire. Before authorization was given, a second set of muzzle flashes erupted from closer to shore, nearly perpendicular to PT-48's line of approach. A concealed escort craft had held position near reef line, engines idle, lights extinguished. Crossfire. Rounds struck the water within yards of the bow. One penetrated the port side gun shield. Another impacted near the reinforced bracing of the aircraft cannon mount. The trap had been set. The outer barge accelerated, drawing PT-48 into overlapping arcs. Timing compressed. Lynch had seconds to choose: withdraw immediately and concede the engagement, or commit to a decisive strike before crossfire tightened further. He chose the latter. At approximately 260 yards, he authorized a single 37mm round against the outer vessel. The shell penetrated near the engine compartment. The barge listed almost immediately. Return fire intensified from the concealed escort. Wood splintered along the deck. A crewman was knocked down by shock from nearby impact, but regained position. The cannon mount remained stable. Lynch did not fire at the escort immediately. Instead, he shifted PT-48's heading slightly toward open water, forcing the concealed craft to adjust angle to maintain line of sight. That movement exposed it. At roughly 300 yards, the escort became visible against lighter horizon band. Lynch authorized a second 37mm shot. The round struck forward section. A flash, then silence from that direction. The first barge, disabled, drifted. The crossfire ended. The engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. Damage to PT-48 included multiple splinter penetrations and one superficial hull breach above waterline. One crewman sustained shrapnel injury to forearm. No fatalities. 3 enemy vessels were confirmed destroyed by morning reconnaissance. The tactical shift was evident. Japanese forces were now targeting T-48 specifically. Bait tactics indicated recognition of its heavier armament. They were no longer treating PT boats as light harassment units, but as threats requiring coordinated response. The Hunter had become a marked target. Word spread along coastal units that an American patrol boat was firing artillery from its bow. Some Japanese personnel reportedly referred to it as a coastal gunboat rather than torpedo craft. The margin for error diminished further. A missed shot would not merely waste ammunition. It would prolong exposure under converging fire. The wooden hull could not endure sustained engagement against multiple automatic cannons. Lynch adjusted subsequent patrol patterns again. He shortened approach windows. He limited exposure time inside 300 yards. He refrained from engaging if multiple unidentified silhouettes were detected without clear firing solution. He conserved rounds, but the pattern was now established. The 37 mm had shifted the balance and drawn attention upward and outward. Enemy countermeasures would continue evolving. So would scrutiny from American command. The next decision would not concern firing range. It would concern permanence. By early November 1942, Japanese coastal movements had grown more disciplined. Barges now operated with deliberate spacing. Escorts ran dark and silent near reef lines. Shore observers signaled with brief light flashes that vanished before they could be triangulated. PT patrol routes were being studied. Lynch recognized the shift. Enemy commanders were no longer improvising reactions. They were shaping engagements in advance. On November 3rd, intercept reports indicated increased barge traffic near Tassafaronga Point, farther west than PT-48's previous engagements. 2 PT boats attempted approach earlier that evening and withdrew under concentrated fire. The pattern suggested coordinated defense rather than ad hoc response. At 21:40 hours, PT-48 entered the sector alone. Sea state was calm. Visibility poor but consistent. No moonlight. Shoreline indistinct beyond 200 yards. At 22:05, lookouts reported a single barge silhouette approximately 500 yards offshore. Engine noise steady, no visible escort. It was familiar. Lynch did not adjust course immediately. He reduced throttle instead, allowing PT-48 to drift slightly off projected intercept path. The barge maintained speed. No sudden maneuver. At 400 yards, the vessel altered course slightly seaward, a subtle move inconsistent with previous runs hugging the coast. That was the signal. The outer vessel was creating space. Lynch scanned shoreward horizon. No muzzle flashes, no engine sounds. Nothing visible. He did not close. The crew waited. At 350 yards, the barge slowed further, almost stationary. It was inviting pursuit. Lynch held position outside effective crossfire range and allowed PT-48 to drift parallel rather than inward. He ordered engines to idle just enough to maintain steerage. Silence stretched. After nearly a minute, faint mechanical noise carried across the water, not from the visible barge, but from closer to shore. A concealed escort was repositioning, likely expecting PT-48 to commit to the bait. Lynch altered heading 10 degrees away from shore, not toward it. The barge responded by accelerating again, attempting to draw PT-48 deeper. He refused. Instead of closing, he widened the angle, forcing any concealed craft to reveal itself if it attempted to maintain intercept geometry. At approximately 400 yards, a second silhouette became faintly visible near reef line. Low profile, engines just above idle. Recognition confirmed. The trap required PT-48 to rush. He did not. Lynch allowed the bait vessel to proceed southward, unengaged for nearly 90 seconds. An interval that would later appear in logs as hesitation. In reality, it was calculation. He shifted PT-48 farther seaward, creating lateral separation that removed the concealed escort's crossfire advantage. Only once the escort altered course to compensate did its silhouette break cleanly against horizon band. That movement exposed it fully. Lynch authorized a single 37 mm round at approximately 320 yards. Impact struck near forward mount. The escort's engine noise ceased almost immediately. The bait barge attempted abrupt turn toward shore, but the angle was now unfavorable. With crossfire eliminated, PT-48 closed slightly, not recklessly, and fired a second round. Penetration mid-hull, structural collapse, followed within seconds. Engagement duration, under 3 minutes. No significant damage sustained by PT-48. The intelligence lay not in firing, it lay in waiting. Had Lynch rushed at 300 yards, as previous engagements encouraged, the concealed escort would have achieved overlapping arcs at lethal proximity. Wooden hulls do not withstand sustained 20mm fire. Instead, by refusing the immediate target, he forced the enemy to commit prematurely. The tactic reversed the geometry. The enemy's plan depended on impatience. PT-48 provided none. After-action notes recorded successful neutralization of coordinated escort and transport. They did not record the pause. Within squadron discussion, some officers remarked on Lynch's conservative engagement pattern. The term remained ambiguous. Japanese barge commanders, however, adjusted again. Subsequent movements became less predictable. Departure times shifted irregularly. Some nights saw no traffic at all, perhaps reconnaissance probing for PT positioning. The duel had evolved beyond gunnery. It had become a contest of patience. But strategic pressure ashore was mounting. Japanese forces continued attempting reinforcement by any available means. Weather windows narrowed as monsoon patterns shifted. Operational timelines tightened. The margin for delay was shrinking. Soon, waiting would no longer be enough. November 12, 1942, 0035 hours, off Tassafaronga. Intelligence indicated a large movement, multiple barges attempting rapid reinforcement under cover of heavy cloud. Destroyers were engaged elsewhere, air support unavailable until dawn, no additional PT boats assigned to Lynch's sector. PT-48 carried limited 37mm ammunition, 4 rounds remaining. Sea state was uneven, wind rising, visibility intermittent. At 0047 hours, lookouts counted 5 silhouettes moving in staggered formation. At least one escort, possibly more concealed near shore. Withdrawal would concede the corridor. Engagement would consume nearly all remaining ammunition. Lynch committed. He did not accelerate recklessly. He positioned seaward again, accepting longer firing distance to avoid crossfire collapse. At approximately 300 yards, escort fire began early. Tracers crossed bow at head height. One round struck near forward deck bracing. Splinters cut across the gunner's sleeve. He did not step back. First 37mm round fired. Lead barge struck forward section. Immediate loss of propulsion. Second round fired at escort silhouette. Impact mid-hull. Return fire ceased. Remaining barges altered course toward shore simultaneously. A coordinated dispersal. Time compressed. Ammunition, 2 rounds. Lynch selected the third vessel not by proximity, but by angle. The one whose position would block the other's escape path if disabled. Third round discharged. Penetration just aft of center. Vessel stalled, partially obstructing route. The final barge accelerated, through narrowing gap near reef line. Lynch waited half a second longer than instinct suggested. He fired the fourth and final round at extended range, nearly 350 yards, compensating for deck rise. Impact struck near waterline. The vessel continued forward 10 yards before settling. Machine guns engaged briefly against the fifth silhouette until it disappeared into shallows beyond safe pursuit. PT-48 withdrew at 01:03 hours. No backup arrived. At dawn, reconnaissance confirmed 4 destroyed barges. 1 escaped damaged. PT-48 returned with hull scoring, minor deck damage, 1 injured crewman stable. No ceremony followed. The engagement report was concise. 4 transports neutralized, 1 escort destroyed, ammunition expended. No mention of ammunition limits, no emphasis on isolation. Within weeks, other PT boats began mounting 37mm cannons taken from aircraft. Fabrication methods improved. Reinforcement brackets standardized. Ammunition storage. Protocols revised. The Bureau of Ordnance revised its position from caution to evaluation. Eventually, factory-installed deck guns appeared on new PT configurations. The modification became doctrine. In subsequent months, PT boats equipped with heavier forward armament accounted for hundreds of shallow draft vessels previously immune to torpedoes. Lynch did not patent the idea. He did not request commendation. His boat was no longer described as careful. It was described as effective. And somewhere along the Solomon Islands coast, Japanese crews adjusted their routes again, this time not because of torpedoes running too deep, but because they knew something heavier might be waiting beyond the dark water. When a weapon designed for the sky reshaped a naval war at sea, was it desperation or disciplined refusal to accept limits?